Daughtry Properties. I'd like to thank our sponsor today, SiteLink Software. And I am kind of waiting for the slide to advance here. We do have a slide for our sponsor this morning.
There's a slight delay, but it just clicked over.
Thank you, Holly. Special thanks to our event sponsor, SiteLink Software, for the partial underwriting of this event. Their generous support keeps your registration fees low, and we greatly appreciate their support. Their contact information is at the bottom of your slide, and we will project it again at the end of our session. To go ahead and get right to it, I'm going to start by introducing our speaker today. Our speaker is Mike Gately, who currently manages self-storage facilities for Daughtry Properties and Professional Management Incorporated. Mike provides fee management and consulting services to storage owners, helping his clients improve cash flow even in difficult markets and in challenging economic times. Previously with Hendry Investment for 13 years, Mike managed 24 facilities, 9 of which were in Texas, until the portfolio was sold in July 2008. So his experience runs quite deep in self-storage. He currently serves as treasurer on the TSSA board and has been a volunteer with us for more than 10 years, presenting numerous sessions throughout the years for both owners and managers. Mike has a master's in business administration from the University of Houston and holds the coveted certified property manager designation from the Institute of Real Estate Management. His property management includes, in addition to self-storage, managing apartments, offices, and retail properties. His main specialty is creating value for individual owners, REITs, and lenders since 1977. So welcome, Mike, and I'll turn the session over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me on revenue management, or really making more money in the self-storage game. Happens to be my favorite topic. And before we jump into the specifics, the concepts we're going to cover today are the best practices in rate management, which have evolved in my managing over 22,000 units since 1996. They have worked well in Texas and in 5 other states, and much of this information has come from manager suggestions. So revenue management is the main way to increase cash flow that I've found, and property value as well. And the beauty of revenue management, to me, is that you do not have to spend money to make money. You're not having to put capital dollars into your property. You're not having to add operating expenses. So if you manage your rates well, you can make more money without having to infuse additional cash. These practices apply in all market conditions and to all properties. No matter what your occupancy is, you can still use the revenue management ideas. During this presentation, I'm going to be using the term standard rate, which is street rate, or the vacant unit rate. So if I say standard rate, that means the rate that you rent to new customers typically. And we will be discussing a particular software, SiteLink, because of my familiarity with it, but that is not an endorsement by the association or the speaker of that particular software. There's other very capable softwares out there, and we just wanted you to know that. Another point that often comes up is that I'll have managers ask me, well, is it okay to have customers paying different rates? What if I lease today to one customer at 10 by 10 at $89, and then later today, if I have a different customer come in, isn't it only fair to keep the same rate? The answer is a definitive no. Each deal that you do, each move-in you do, is independent of the other, and you can change your rates at any time on the same size, so there's no problem with changing your rates. It's not against the law, and it's done every day in all types of industries besides ours. For example, you know what happens when you call for airline tickets. A lot of demand pricing is all it is, so you can change your rates. The other point I'd like to make is that what we're doing in this presentation is taking advantage of month-to-month leases. We give our customers a chance to move out. They have the flexibility of being able to move pretty much any month they want to. They're not locked into a long-term lease, which in turn gives us the flexibility to change the rate as we deem appropriate. And compared to other types of real estate, apartments, commercial, retail, the tenants have protection for a long period of time at a certain rate, and they're committing to us that they would stay for that long period of time. But in this case, they're not committing to us that they'll stay long term, which gives us the flexibility to raise rents as we deem it appropriate, or to lower rents. But of course, mostly we're going to be raising rents. But with that, let's get moving. The number one point that I'd like to make is that you should think like a retailer, that you should offer like Target, Kohl's, Walmart, when they're thinking about their occupancy, they don't think, or their leasing, their sales rates, they're looking at how much they sell of individual products, not just what they're selling overall. And they will track, as you know, their sales in the shoe department, men's shoes, women's shoes, shirts, every product individually. And if they have products that are doing well, even if the overall store sales are flat, they'll know that. And they'll use that to price accordingly. And we can do the same in the sense that we are selling individual products. You have a 5x5, 5x10. Every size that you have is a different product. A customer coming in that's looking for a 5x5 has no interest in a 10x20. They're only interested in the size that fits them. So you have inside units many times, outside units, and you have different sizes that, like I was saying, that would fit the demand. And what I found is that I'll have customers, or I'll have properties that we're running on a 5x10 full, but on another size, we might be running at a lower occupancy. We might be at 70%, whereas on the 5x10, we might be at 90%, or a 10x15, maybe 85%, a 10x10. 83%. So if you look at it by size, then that's much better than being overly influenced by your overall occupancy. And I've gone into markets, talked to owners who maybe their overall occupancy wasn't where they wanted it. Maybe it was in the low 80s. But when we started dialing in size by size, then we found that, well, look here, you've had this particular size that has done quite well and has been consistently doing better than 90%. That's a signal to you that you have strong demand, and then on that size, you can consider raising the rent. We do use, what I've evolved over time, is a 90% as the trigger point for considering higher rates. Now, we could have some markets where we might do it at 88%, 92%, but in general, 90% works. For example, here we are in the middle of May. We're coming into our prime leasing season. I would certainly, with properties with certain sizes at 90%, consider moving that rate up on that size. And in fact, because we're getting into our prime season, especially if I look back over the history of the property and see that maybe we were, last year, this was when we hit our peak demand, even if I was at 86 or 87%, I might bump it up. So as you know your properties and when you get your traffic, then it's good to be considering that and then anticipating the demand and raising rents accordingly. And just like a retailer, if we take the retailer mentality, that as you have the demand on certain sizes, then you would raise the price. And just keep that in mind, size by size. I divide my pricing strategy into two parts, the vacant units and the occupied units. And I start with the vacant units. And on those, they set the barometer for what I'm going to be able to do longer term. If I have the demand from the street and I can see that I can raise my rents, then that helps me decide what to do with my current customers. As an example, if right now I had a 10x10 size that I was considering raising the street rent on, and let's say I took it up from $100 to $105, and then after 6 weeks, maybe I've leased several of those units, and I see that the 10x10 is doing quite well, and I was able to hold that $105. Then 6 weeks from now, you're right around the beginning of July. If I was going to do a rent increase to our customers, then I've already paved the way on a 10x10 to show that I can get a higher rent. So the vacant units are a testing ground for your occupied units. And when you send out the rent increase to a customer, if they were to come in and say, well, what gives, you give me this $5 bump, you can say, well, your rate has been lower, and we've kept it for some time at the lower rate than what our new move-ins. Our newer customers are coming in at a higher rate. So it gives you something to tell your customers, but most importantly, it allows you the confidence to realize that you can get the higher rate. One of the things that I think we all wear is a badge of honor where we say 100% occupancy. My golly, we work hard, our managers work their tails off, they get the properties well leased up. Everybody wants to feel like, my gosh, I've got a waiting list on this side. And in one sense, that is great because you've got that revenue coming in. But what I explain to managers is that really you don't want 100% occupancy continually on each side. And the reason for that we're going to get into. But for example, if you're 100% occupied on a 10 by 15, and a prospect calls you, can you lease them a 10 by 15? Obviously not. You don't have the vacancy. So you're not only going to lose the prospect for the 10 by 15, you may lose them for any size. Because if they called on that size, you know as well as I do that oftentimes customers don't really know the size they want. And when they come in, they said they wanted a 10 by 15, but you found out another size worked better for them, and you fit them into it. So my point is you're shutting down potential business every time you have a product that you can't sell. And again, like a merchant, if you don't have the product, you're out of business on that particular product line. So if you don't want to be in a position where you are without a product. And furthermore, you can't test demand if you can't lease. If you get full on a 10 by 15 and you don't have a move out for 2 months, then you are in a position to not know what higher rate you could get until you actually have a vacate and a release. So what you're doing is you're leaving money on the table because you aren't able to test the higher rate. Let's go through, and this has been helpful for managers I've worked with, for them to understand financially why an owner can have a few vacants on the property but still be in a position where they can make more money than if they were full. So we're setting up an example that demonstrates this. There's 2 facilities. Facility 1 is 100% leased at $80 per unit. So the gross potential on this property is 100 times 80. That's $8,000, okay, per month. Then facility 2 is 90% leased, but this owner has bumped his rents, and he's at $90 per unit. It has hurt him on his occupancy, though. He still has 10 units to lease. So his gross potential, in other words, if every unit were leased, he would be getting $9,000. But in effect, he's not getting $9,000 because he has 10 vacants. He has 90 occupied units. So let's go through the math. Which is making more money now? The facility 1 is pulling in $8,000 as full gross potential. Facility 2 is pulling in $90 times 90 units, which is $8,100. So in this example, even though facility 2 has 10 vacant units, the guy is making, or the woman's making, an extra $100 a month. But that's not the real kicker. Here is the kicker. Which has the ability to make more money in the future? If I'm operating facility 1, I can't test a higher rate because I don't have a vacant, and I can't lease any more units to improve my cash flow because I'm full. Facility 2 is sitting on 10 vacants. Every one of those leased is an extra $90. So facility 2 not only makes more money now, but it has the potential to make more money over the coming months. And facility 2 is still in business to lease because they still have product available. They have 10 units to lease, so they can have activity. So in this example, facility 2 is the one that I would like to own and would command a higher price on the market if you were selling it, have more cash flow if you owned it, and you'd be able to finance more money if you needed to refinance the property. Now, getting a little bit away from the move-in side of it, but talking about the role of discounting and how that works with your customers. Actually, I said that wrong. This is still about move-ins, but on discounts. Tenants underestimate their length of stay. What I'm going through is a psychology of why discounting can be effective for you if it's used effectively. In our case, we think of customers staying for many months because we know that they underestimate their length of stay. They might think they're going to be at the property 2 months or 3 months. So if you have a customer walk into you that you're offering 1 month free, and they think that they're going to stay there for 2 months, then in their mind they're saying, okay, I'm going to get 2 months stay for the price of 1 month, so I'm getting 50% off. This is a good deal. So they're happy. And we're thinking, okay, we'll take the risk. They might only stay 2 months, and if so, then we've given 1 month away, and we haven't made much money. But we also know that life happens. People move in, and then they don't move out as quickly as they say they will. And they stay 6 months, 8 months, years, in fact, in many cases. So that 1 month free, if they stay 8 months, all of a sudden you've just given 1/8 off instead of 1/2 off. So that's the rationale for why discounting can be helpful, because the customer values it at a higher rate than we do. And if you do need to do something that has to do with kickstarting your leasing, it's cheaper to offer a discount short term than to lower the rent. Because once the discount burns off, you've still got your rate at the higher rate. What I say to managers and owners is you should only be offering discounts to secure leases you would not otherwise get. And I think we've all seen the example of maybe with a new employee, they'll offer a discount to a customer that they would have leased to anyway. The customer's in, they said they want the unit, they walk them back to the office and say, by the way, we're offering a special on this and you can get 1 month free. Well, in most cases, that you've just given away the farm. You should only offer discounts in those situations where you need to use that as an incentive to close the deal. And that takes training of employees. You have to work with the employees and the managers and the assistants for them to listen to the customer, to know the buying signals, and to figure out when to offer the discount. The thing that I think we want to look at is when we're offering discounts is look at the amount of dollars that tenant's going to generate over time. And by that, if you're talking to a prospect who's telling you that they're going overseas for 18 months, then you could probably offer a sweeter discount to them than you would to somebody that says, I've got only a month's need for storage or 2 months tops, and I'm going to have to be out, and this is what I'm doing, and you're convinced they're only going to be there a short term. Why would you offer them a discount? So knowing the circumstances that the prospect is in helps you decide if the discount is appropriate. Now, the thing that can happen easily to all of us is that discounts can be given as a crutch to overcome other issues. So, for example, if your product isn't up to standard, and by that I mean maybe your curb appeal isn't quite where you want it, or you have a manager that maybe doesn't understand the sales process and is quick to offer discounts because they maybe haven't had a chance to clean the units, they don't know how to present the product in its best light. So what you want to do is make sure that you as the manager and the owner are working together and only offering a discount for reasons outside market. In other words, beyond your internal control. It has to do with market dynamics, not to do, the cheapest thing for you to do to avoid sacrificing your rate is to make sure your product is ready and your curb appeal is good. And that applies in any type of market conditions. So discounting, when I say to a manager, okay, we will offer a discount on these sizes, the other thing I'll say is, okay, we're looking at the occupancy statistics report for the property. We're saying, okay, on these 10 by 15s, you've got 8 vacant right now. You can offer a discount of 1/2 month free on the second month until you get down to 4 of those units, or for the next 45 days, whichever comes first. And by doing that, I protected our cash flow or our revenue potential 2 ways. Number one, I created a sense of urgency that helps the manager sell because I'm only offering the discount for a period of time. And secondly, I'm setting up a structure for the manager to realize that the discount is not going to be there forever. It's only because we have units to lease right now, more units than we want. As soon as we get our vacancy more under control, then we're stopping that discount. Now, back to occupied units and the pricing on those. And the big concern we all have is, okay, how can you reduce your risk of move-outs, high move-outs? And one of the best ways to do that is to spread out your rent increases over time. Again, remember, we have month-to-month leases. I think all of us kind of get in a mindset, okay, I'm thinking about rent increases now. I want to get this off my plate. I want to check this. I've got a 300-unit property. I've got 280 occupied units. I'm sending all letters now because I want this done, and I don't want to have to think about it for another year. That is risky thinking. You should be thinking in advance and planning your rent increases. Ideally, you could do some every month or every quarter. And most of us don't get around to doing it that frequently, but if you do build it into a system where you're doing some increases, for example, in the one I just gave, the 280 occupied units, if you send out 20 to 30 rent increases a month and you had a standing arrangement with the manager, subject to certain guidelines that you set up for the manager, I want you to send out a minimum of 20 rent increases every month, and this is the guidelines we have. And we're going to get into those guidelines. But by doing that, you're minimizing a chance of high move-outs. Now, if you are picking the time of year to do major rent increases, if you do that, I would suggest to send the letters in the spring because you want the prime summer months to release those units that may vacate. Yes, you could see some vacates, although if we do this right, I don't think you would see many based on my experience. But if you did have some vacate, let's say you sent out, for example, I just sent out on a 500-unit property with about 450 or 470 tenants, we sent out 150 rent increases to be effective May 1st. And of those 150, we had 2 or 3 that told us they moved out because of the rent increase. So yes, we lost a few. But that's typical. If you plan it well, you don't have that many move out. But here we are coming into our prime leasing season, and we will release those units. And in the case that I just used as an example, we raised our monthly rent by over $800, and we had 2 move-outs that we expect to release quickly. We're ahead of the game. Okay, like we talked about before, if you test rents on vacant units and successfully lease at those higher rates, you've given the manager confidence to raise customer rates because you can see that you've proven them to the street. So you've paved the way for raising rents on occupied units. Now, as part of this whole process, software can help you. It's not required that you use software to do your rate management, but it makes it easier for you to do. And if it saves time, that means it's probably going to be done more frequently and more efficiently. And you can build the parameters into your software of what you want the rate increases to look like. And we'll use SiteLink as an example, but like I said before, there are many softwares that have similar features. And in using SiteLink, if you'll see here the rate management circle, and we're going to go into unit revenue management. And then you have a choice. You don't have to use this feature. You can enable the feature to be active, or if you would prefer for a period of time to do it manually and you don't want the software to be prompting you, then you can disable as it's clicked right there. And just for example, you have here, you can do rent reductions too. Now, I don't automate my rent reductions. If I ever think I need to lower the rents, I want that to be a discussion between the manager and myself. But you can certainly use the software to do that. You can round your revenue management to whichever amount you want, as you can see there, from anywhere from no rounding to rounding to the nearest dollar. We round to the nearest dollar, and there's other rounding there, $5, $10, so on. You can, under your plan, you can exclude from revenue management maybe certain sizes that have only a few units, because you would rather do those manually because it's hard to use a system when you only have, say, 4 of a certain type. So you can exclude, like it points out right here, exclude from revenue management. In this case, the default is 10. So if you only have 10 of a 5 by 7.5, then you could exclude those by this process. And then you would do it manually. And then the next point, default rate choice. Now this is important in terms of understanding the concepts. Default to the revenue management rate or standard rate at move-in. So what this means is if the software picks up a prompt of a rent increase, let's say your 10 by 10 standard rate is $95. Then the way this is, the standard rate is going to be $95 because it's going to go to that by default. But let's say that the revenue management feature of your software prompts indicates that you should go up to, say, $99. Then the manager would have the discretion to go to that higher rate or not. However, if you clicked this button instead, then you would automatically be going to the higher rate, not just being prompted. Okay. Then quickly here, I just want to point out, we won't get into a lot of detail, but there's different bands or tiers of occupancy where you can use the automated option 1, which is conservative, to option 2, which is mildly conservative, and of course mildly aggressive, and aggressive all the way to option 4. And at each tier of occupancy, you go up a certain percent if you prompt it. If you were using this option when you got between 95 and 100% on a certain size, and that was within 0 or 30 days of holding it, then you're going up 3%. And if you went to the mildly conservative, it goes up 4%. You step up to the mildly aggressive, it's 5%. And to the aggressive, it's 6%. So those are kind of canned programs where you could just click in and use those to manage your process, but you don't have to. You can go into these and customize what you want. These are custom amounts that you could use to set up your own parameters for the rent increase. And my purpose here isn't so much to train you on the software, but just to explain that these options are out there if you choose to use them. Now, in the circle here, you can see you can set tenants' rates to standard rate automatically, so that if you were doing an occupied rent increase and your market rate was $7 higher than what the customer's paying, it automatically move them up to that market or standard rate. Or you can increase rates by a target percentage amount. And by the way, you can also let your occupied units go above standard rate if you want. The standard rate is if you want to limit your increases to that amount, you can, but you don't have to. So there's a lot of features in this software that allow you to save time. Look here. This is the qualifying thresholds for a rate change. See that? Thresholds for qualifying for a rate change. Days since rate was last changed. You can put in there whatever you want. So that means for a move-in or for a rent increase. So in this case, we have 270 days in there since the last increase. In other words, if you put that in there, you wouldn't increase the same customer more than every 9 months. And again, many of us use a year. You don't want to increase it more than a year, then you'd put 365 days there. Or move-in, days since move-in. You could set that parameter too. Maybe you want to not consider a rent increase to a customer until they've been with you at least 6 months. Then you'd put 180 days there. So you have the options to put what you want. And then let's look at a pending rate increase. There's two things I want to show you here. The monthly standard rate that you see in the left circle is what what the regular rate is on that unit, your market rate. And the push rate is what's being prompted by the software. In this case, they're all the same because it's just an example, but normally your push rate could be different, or oftentimes it's going to be different. So again, by how you instruct the software, your push rate could be automatically accepted or just a suggestion for the manager to consider. Before you implement a rent increase, you can look at a pending rate change and see how it's stacking up, how much you'd be going up, and you have certain color highlights in there that tell you, okay, the rate is X% below standard, and it's giving you a chance to look through and double check if you're comfortable with the amount of increase that's being shown per customer. So you have a chance to modify this before you put it in place.
Okay, let's talk about prepaid rent discounts. I think many of us have properties where there's been a certain prepaid discount that's been in place for some time, that our customers are used to a certain amount, and even managers. Maybe it's been 2 managers ago that the policy was set up, or even the prior owner, and then the new owner has just inherited a policy. So the impact of a prepaid rent discount is pretty substantial. If you're automatically given 12-month free to a customer who pays for a year, you're basically giving away 8.3%. The question is that a good decision for your property? Or if you're doing 7th month free, that's over a 14% discount. Just think about it. That's a big number. 14% is a big number. Now, when many of these discounts were put in place, we had more inflation in terms of the national economy than what is being experienced in the last few years. You could, in the good old days, you could park your money in the bank if you got prepaid as the owner and maybe earn 4, 5, 6, 7%. Well, I think all of us know that those days are not here now. Those are long gone. If you have money to put in the bank, you're going to earn 1% or less. So why would you give 14% away, or 7 or 8% away? And the question I would have us consider is, what would happen if you lower the prepaid discount? In the cases that I've seen that done, customers, you might have to give them a year to get weaned off the old program if they've been with you a long time, but you can do it. It just takes a planned approach. And just look at it, and you can look at it by size too. You might have certain sizes that you can't keep in stock. You're raising the street rents, so why would you offer a prepaid discount to a customer that stays a long time? It doesn't always make sense. Now, when do prepaid discounts make sense? There are certain cases. Let's say you've got a competitor coming in across the street and you want to lock in your customers and do something to discourage move-outs, then yes, you could do that then, because what you're doing is you're hopefully mitigating the impact of the new property by locking your customers in during the lease-up period for the new property. So, and you might have extremely competitive situation where you're going to keep prepaid discounts in place because you don't want to rock the boat in any way with your customers, and that makes perfect sense. It's just evaluate it at least every year to decide what you're going to offer and be prepared to change it based on market conditions.
Mike?
Yes, Jenny.
Mike, can I interrupt you just for a moment? We had quite a few people join after our beginning introduction with instructions. I want to remind the attendees that if you don't see your question or chat pane to send in questions, if you will click on the orange box with the arrow in it, that'll open it up for you. We've had several questions come through, but they tend to all kind of come in a cluster at the end. So if there's anything that occurs to you or you want to take advantage of Mike's tremendous expertise in this area or any other area of management, be sure and type in your question and hit submit. Thank you, Mike.
Sure. I think all of us have been in a situation where we're thinking, oh my gosh, a rent increase, I don't know about that right now. I'm thinking of waiting this out because this is going to be a rough year for us. Let's just punt and wait till next year. And I've come into properties where owners have done that. And I've done that in the past in really rough market conditions. And all I can tell you is, from my experience, it's delusional to think that you're going to catch up. You do not catch up, because the customer, let's take an example. You pass on a rent increase for 2 or 3 years because of rough market conditions, and your 10 by 10 that you rented that customer for $80 is now, say, $97 to the market. So it's up $17. And then in your mind, you've given this guy a pass for 2 or 3 years or 4 years, and you're saying, you know, I need to catch this guy up. But he's gotten quite a break. I mean, I don't know what happened, but we're $17 under market here. So I say, okay, well, let's just hit the switch, and you hit him for a $17 bump. You can guess the results. The customer's not going to come in and thank you for waiting 3 or 4 years to give him an increase. They're going to vote with their feet, and they're going to leave in many cases when they get a big bump. Whereas if you had just bumped them every year $3 or $4 or $5, you probably could have kept them. So, and the cash flow that you lost in those 3 or 4 years, you just don't get it back. So my point is that if you can at all do it, stay with the program. A modest increase, a small increase is better than no increase. And if you try and catch up, and in certain cases maybe you take over a property, you're doing some improvements to it, you know that you cannot make the property work on the current rates and you're going to go up, then you have to plan in a hit to your occupancy, because no matter how sweet you make the property, there's going to be certain customers that are used to the old rate and won't buy into it. And it still might be worth making the change to get your rent stream where you want it, but you're just going to have to deal with the hit in your occupancy. Here is one of the keys to me to whether a rent increase goes smoothly or not. It's the work you do in advance with the managers. And if we place ourselves in the manager's shoes, whenever we do a rent increase, it's a point of tension for the manager, because customers are going to come in and complain. There's no doubt about it that they are going to ask questions or complain, and some are going to threaten to move out, and you can have some actually move out. We know that. But if the manager knows the bigger picture, and you give the manager a certain amount of discretion on how to handle the rent increase, then you can reduce their pressure, and you can end up with the increase being more effective. So what I do is I'll say, okay, with the manager, we're going to do a 200 letters this month. With these 200 letters, it's going to show, excuse me, just for a second, I'll take a drink of water. It's going to show with this rent increase that we're going to pick up from these 200 letters an extra $1,000 a month. If you have 5 people vacate at an average rent of $70, then we're going to lose $350 from those folks, but we're still ahead of the game by $650 because we did the $1,000 increases. So from that premise, then the manager, and you know what happens, you send out the 200 letters, 150 of them just go down the road, they're happy, they don't even recognize they got the rent increase, they're just paying the higher rate, happy to be there. Maybe 5 or 10 people kind of call and ask questions. You might have a couple that really come in and raise Cain with the manager and tell you how the world's going to heck in a handbasket and they just can't take it anymore. And the manager's thinking about those few people and saying, my gosh, I'm getting beat up here. And if these 2 people are telling me they don't like it, what about the ones that aren't calling me? And then the manager's like, oh boy, this is a disaster. But it's not a disaster. It's just emotional for the few people that decide it's not a good thing for them. And if the manager knows the bigger picture, then they can say, okay, I'm going to do the best job I can. I'm going to take care of these people. And you might give the manager some discretion. You decide how much they can adjust the increase. Maybe you would split the difference. So if you know ahead of time as a manager that the guy that gets the $7 increase and comes in and tells you he's out of here because he can't take it, then if you can keep him by splitting the difference, then let the manager have that authority. And again, the manager needs to be given guidelines on how to handle this. So the manager then is better understanding the bigger picture, and I haven't, with good planning, I have not had it be a problem on the sites that I've managed. Now, one of the things I'll say is the rent increase letter, I'm just giving you an example, obviously, from a large operator, a national operator. And the letter is legal in that it takes care of the needs of telling you the rent's going up. It was sent on an open postcard format, and it doesn't have any warm fuzzies in there about why they'd want to keep you that I can really see. So my point is the letter is important. It represents your professionalism and your sense of concern about the customer. And if you've had some things go on about what you've improved at the property, or you've done certain things that the customer would appreciate knowing about, then I think this is a good time to put it in your letter. Customize the letter to the situation. It doesn't always have to be a canned letter. Yes, a lot of people may not read the whole letter, but there will be some that will read it carefully. And better to put out a good letter that explains things than to send out one that's just kind of pro forma, in my opinion. Because what you can offer and I can offer as independent operators of properties is TLC to our customers. We don't have 20,000 customers every day that we're dealing with that are numbers to us. We're dealing with John Jones and Mary Smith, and we know them, and we can send them a letter that's more customized. I guess at this point I've covered a lot of ground, and the point that I really like to make is have a continuous process on your rent increases. Look at it monthly. If you can get a little bit, it's better than not going for anything. And just think in terms of each month, look it over, use the software to an advantage for yourself. It can prompt. It doesn't really take over the process. It will never take over this process or substitute for your judgment or the manager's judgment. But especially if you have a property that has a lot of different sizes, the software helps you keep up with your occupancy by size. I think we've all had the situation where we're noticing that, my gosh, on these 5x10s, I've been full for the last 3 months. I've been asleep at the switch. Why didn't I raise the rate? It got away from us because we were busy and we didn't notice. But with the software, it will prompt you so at least you can make the decision to bump the rent or not. I guess with that, if we have any questions, then Jenny, I'd be glad to entertain them.
All right. Mike, did you decide to skip over that public storage notice, the previous slide?
This one here?
I think it was up just for a split second.
Okay. I was explaining it, but I'll go through it again. This rent increase notice to me is not very personal. What I was explaining a second ago, maybe I didn't make it clear, is that it was sent as an open postcard to the customer. It's not in an envelope. And what I'm saying is I suggest you use a customized letter to explain your rent increase. And then that way, that's something we can offer as small operators, that we can customize the situation of our property. The other thing I like to do, that independent of this letter, I like the manager to know the reasons for the rent increase if we've had some operating expenses to go up, to explain to the manager that our utilities are going up, whatever it might be, because at least they'll know that not every dollar of a rent increase automatically drops to the bottom line. A lot of this is being absorbed by increased operating expenses. And I think most of us have seen in the last year that a lot of our service expenses, for whether it's utilities or dumpsters or landscape service, whatever, that they are starting to go back up.
Good point. So this postcard is meant to be a don't do this example.
Yeah, exactly.
This is an example
right.
of a rent increase done poorly. All right. So we do have questions from our attendee, starting with Joe, who his situation is, and I'm sure it's like many others, he really doesn't like a prospective tenant to get away. So what he's saying is that when he's full on a size that they're asking for, he offers them the next size up, but at a lower rate than he would normally ask for it. And then if they stay longer, that he may or may not give them a promotional free month. He just kind of bases it on the situation. If they stay longer than they say they're going to, he might do a rent increase, then, you know, and try to bump them back up. But his point is he's doing everything he can not to let a customer get away because of sizing or pricing. He tries to meet or beat his competitors' offers. He'll take anything that's realistic, and he wonders if he's doing the right thing.
It depends on the market conditions, but if I love the fact that he's keeping the customer in there engaged and trying to figure out a way to make it work, because we all know if the customer leaves, you know, even if they have the best of intentions of coming back, a lot of times they just don't. So, and what he's doing is giving away space that he already has if he's upgrading him to the next size. I think that's smart. The only thing I would suggest is that you really have a good system, a tickler system, so that if they stay, if you're intending that they could have that bigger size at the price of the next lower size for 3 months or 6 months, then have a tickler in your software to make sure it doesn't get away from you. Because if you allow that to go longer term, then you're disrupting your revenue potential significantly. But yeah, and I would only do that on sizes where I was below, say, 86, 87%. As we're going into the prime leasing season now, you know, why would I give away a size that I can lease anyway at the regular rate? So subject to those two guidelines, I think it makes sense.
Thank you. Carmen is asking, her issue is that she has 2 new facilities built in the last year, 2 new competitors. They're offering extremely competitive discounts, An example is pay for 6 months, get 6 months free. That's killer. How can we successfully compete against discounts like this?
If they're real close to you, then what you end up having to do is grin and bear it to get through the lease up for those properties. And you may end up having to basically sacrifice your gross potential for income, immediate income, and lower the rates and offer the discounts if you feel like it's having that much of an impact. Now, I'll give an example of a lady that was operating one property in Seguin that was telling me of a similar situation. And then I said, well, so what's your occupancy now that you have this new competitor? And she was really focused on that new competitor as just making her life miserable since it came into the market, and just probably wanted to go over there and throttle anybody she could get her hands on. And she said, well, I went down from 95% to 87%. And I said, well, and I wouldn't discount your rates dramatically when you're still at 87%. Yeah, you're not in as good a position as you were before, but you can, if you start offering month free or 6 month free or all kinds of these heavy discounts, you're going to have a bigger financial loss that you've basically done to yourself than if you just ride it out with your competitor. So there's many times where you just say, okay, I'm not in as good a market as I was. My 90% occupancy is not going to be back for another year or year and a half. I'm going to end up sacrificing some occupancy. But when you do the math on it, you could be better off holding your rate and working through the excess demand or excess supply in that market until it's leased up. If you can't do that, then you're going to have to discount just like they are. It's just that make sure you're not making a gut decision before you work the numbers.
Mike, the experience that you've had with the properties that you've managed, both for Hendry and for Daughtry and other owners, do you tend to be the price leader, middle of the road, competitive? What's your philosophy?
Most of the properties have been price leaders, but I've had properties that weren't because of the age of the property and the amenity package. It just wasn't going to be. So if you have the biggest thing to me on pricing is back to let the market help you decide the pricing. Don't assume you know the pricing. Look at your occupancy. If you already have an established property that's open and you see that your occupancy on certain sizes is continuously running strong, then bump the rate up. Keep bumping it until you hit resistance, until you can't hold 90% occupancy. And then you will find out. What I found is that there's an old phrase, the market is king. None of us knows what our properties are capable of, but we know how to calibrate month by month to use the demand to help us decide what we can get. So, and I've found properties where I've had markets where I've had older properties with good managers and taking care of clean curb appeal and clean units that we were outperforming in rate and occupancy some of the newer properties that were just trying to rent on the glitz of being new. So it's a balancing act, and if you're watching your market and seeing what's going on with your competitors and asking your prospects where do they come from, a lot of times a manager will get it in their head that, oh, this competitor over here is now undercharging us by $12 on this unit. It's going to really screw up our market. And I said, well, let's talk about your prospects. How many of them lease without going to other properties? In other words, let's get into where are your prospects coming from, and are they really aware of that other property, and how much is it really a factor in our leasing? And so I'm just careful not to react because a competitor dropped its rent. If I'm holding my occupancy, and if I see that a competitor hasn't dramatically affected my occupancy on a size and that my prospects aren't really bringing that up that often, then I'm going to hold my price. One other example I'd give on that is if you're at 90% on a size, say a 10 by 10, and your manager calls you and says, you know, I just had 3 people in today looking for a 10 by 10, and they're telling me the one down the street is undercutting us by $15 and they're going to go lease there. And I'm going to say to the manager, you know what, I'm sorry that we didn't get those leases. I really wish we'd gotten them. But you're holding 90% occupancy, and you're getting enough traffic in to lease that 10 by 10 at the price that we want, that you've been maintaining that 90% occupancy. So if that competitor is going to leave money on the table and rent it for cheap while we're holding our rate and occupancy, we can't control what they can do, but we're not going to just react when you have enough demand to hold your occupancy at the occupancy rate that we're wanting. But that's a tough thing for a manager to understand until you explain it, because nobody likes to see a prospect walk out the door. But there's some times when you're doing your pricing that you've got to be willing to do that.
Mike, that's a great segue into the questions that we have from a few attendees. Beverly and Michael are both in similar situations. Beverly is in Odessa, and because of the oil boom there, their occupancies across the board are at 100%. And she's wondering how they handle, I mean, it's a good problem to have. She's wondering how they handle rent increases. And Michael's situation is 99% occupied property, and their rates are very similar to their competitors. Do you recommend increasing their street rate to be the highest in the market?
I think
I'm not sure what's happening with our slideshow. It's kind of flickering on and off.
Yeah.
But
I would suggest they sell both those properties to me. Just no. What I would say is the following: it's a magnificent position to be in. There's more demand than there is supply. If you think about it long term as an owner in that market, if you don't raise your rate, it's going to happen. There's going to be new supply built in that market if that continues. So can you capitalize on that demand while you have it? Yes, I would. And the beauty of the situation is, don't worry about what your competitors are charging. All that really matters is, can you lease at a higher rate enough to hold the occupancy that you deem your target occupancy? So if you go up, let's say you send out rent increases to your customers, and you drop from 100% to 82% because you get pretty aggressive, and then you lease back up, you're going to be in a better financial position than you are now. So I would be very aggressive on raising the rates, especially if the customer had been in there for, say, 6 months or longer, because you're in a boom situation and you have the opportunity to do it. Now, what I wouldn't do is continually hit the same customers with repeat increases. But when I hit them, I'd hit them once pretty hard, and then, look at it again, in a very unusual market like that, maybe twice a year, but most of the time just once a year. But if you got a customer at $100 and your competitors are, whatever they're charging, you can see that you could go up $10 or $12 or $15, and they don't really have another place to move to, then I would just go up and just tell them it is a function of supply and demand, but we are taking care of you. We're keeping our property in good shape. We, explain why that it makes sense for them to stay with you. And if they don't stay, you're going to release to somebody else at that rate. And that's a real good example of why you want to have your street rents at a higher rate than your occupied, because you can go back to the customer and say, you know what, yes, we are going up $12 on you, but our street rate is even higher than that. And we've had our street rate at that rate for a little time now, and we didn't come back to you until this point. So you're, in effect, saying that as a current customer, they were getting some kind of break. So that's what I would do.
Thanks, Mike. Our buddy Larry Easley he has more of a comment than a question. He wanted to thank you for the job that you did on explaining incremental rate increases. He said he's been using the minimal rate increase that you suggested for some time, and he's had great results. $3 to $5 raises in rent do not scare people away. It's the bigger ones that do, and he just wanted to applaud your focus on that, your emphasis on getting those smaller rent increases that add up, because he said it's been very successful for him as well.
Coming from Larry, operating all the properties he does across the state and elsewhere, that's quite a compliment. And on top of that, I think, Jenny, you and I were at a luncheon last week where the Uncle Bob's regional manager for 13 properties in South Texas was basically, without any prompting from us, telling us that they were doing the same thing and that it was working quite well for them. So it's what is happening in the industry. And again, I think it's important that I bring up something that you cannot raise your rents in concert with a competitor, because that's called price collusion and it's illegal. But you have every opportunity to know what's going on in your market and independently decide what you want to do. So if you're informed about your market and you make an independent decision about your property, that's perfectly fine. And trading information on rates is perfectly acceptable and legal. It's just you can't decide jointly with another property, a competitor property, to go up on your rate. But pretty much knowing what's going on in your market is the key in deciding independently what you can do.
We have some great questions coming in, and you can continue to send your questions in. We're doing fine on time. We're at 11 o'clock, and we have allowed another 15 minutes. If we have that many questions, we'll keep going. The next question is from Jeffrey. He has strictly RV and boat storage. His units are concrete, enclosed. Many have door openers. Also, they're wider. They're 14 feet wide. How would you capitalize on getting extra rent for those units?
I guess the first question I would ask is there an awareness of the market about your product? If you know, part of it is making sure that the public is aware of the quality of product you have, and because your pricing may not be an issue if you have adequate awareness and traffic into the property. And so if you get that problem solved by having good curb appeal and a good marketing program where you're getting inquiries, then I think you can show the product and then explain. And surprisingly, I've seen things like Craigslist listings that help get awareness out there. People go to Craigslist all the time. Just referral bonuses to your current customers if they know somebody. Going to RV dealers in the area that sell RVs or boat dealers and saying, look, when you sell a new or used boat where they want to protect it, have them come my way because I've got what they need. And you can even pay referral gift cards or whatever to those car places. But a lot of times when I get into questions like that with an owner, it's not so much that they have a pricing issue as they don't have enough traffic issue. And that's a whole other discussion. But do you have the curb appeal? Do you have the marketing program? Are you generating the traffic? And because your pricing could be under what it should be because you're compensating for a lack of traffic, when if you spent some time figuring out the traffic side of it, and of course the internet with the web and with the different lead generators that you can look at out there, and having a well-done web page that explains what your product is, that, and coming from somebody like myself who's been dealing with apartments and now self-storage for the last 30 years, the internet thing is, I've just been amazed by how much it's made a difference in our industry in the last 5 years. And that's really where the savvy operators are distinguishing themselves on market demand. They're getting good web pages and they're working hard to have search engine optimization. So if you have any doubt about your web presence, then I would, for any property, but in the case of the RVs, then I would bump that up because that could be money well spent.
And Jeffrey, as he listens to your answer, Mike, he had a few comments in response. He said they do have the curb appeal, and listening to it, he said he does think it's a traffic issue, does have a number of Google AdWord ads. And I want to echo what you said a moment ago, Mike. I know I've not been a big Craigslist user, but recently I've been using it because of things we're buying for a lake house. And I know when I looked at some listings and things that have to do with boats, for example, or RVs, you see a lot of those postings. You see, you know, the availability of storage or the availability of services when people are just looking to buy something. So there are a lot of opportunities out there, and of course, as we all know, Craigslist is free, so you can take advantage of that to create awareness. And you had some good examples there. He does also asked, do you have a website manager that you would recommend? And I assume by that, and Jeffrey, you can message us if we didn't get this correct, but we assume you mean someone who actually does the SEO, the search engine optimization and web design and that sort of thing for you. He's saying designer. Do you have a website designer that you would recommend?
I can mention a couple that we've used, and I would say that, like even now with, we're redoing a web page for one of our properties, and we're going to go back to the market and check it out. But depends on if you want it to be interfaced with your software, management software, I would check with your management software and see if they have certain web designers that work with them that will have it interfaced. But if that's not an issue, then you, of course, don't need to go that route. But for example, because of my familiarity with SiteLink, there's several vendors that coordinate well with SiteLink on the interface. So those are ones that we talk to first, but that's not the whole universe, obviously. But I've used Automatit, AUTOMATIT. They're well respected in the industry. You know, you could consider them. Another one is G5. G5 is like a very large company that supports web design in all kinds of industries, not just storage by any stretch. And there's no doubt about their expertise. The bigger question is, will your account be big enough to get their attention? And you will pay kind of on the high end of the scale because they're like, you're hiring the Cadillac of the industry. So, you know, it just depends if that's a good fit for you. There's a group that we're using now called the Storage Group out of Florida that was prior owners in the storage business that now have some features that we're just trying out. Those are 3 companies, but that is such a fast-moving area that my advice is to check with a lot of folks and do your own homework, because 5 months from now it's going to be different than it is today. It's just, but those are 3 companies that I can tell you that we've, you know, had good luck with.
And I feel I need to follow that comment up with 2 statements. One, as Mike said earlier, you know, this is not an endorsement from the association for these companies. These are his personal experiences, and I thank him for being willing to share that with the attendees. But he's not speaking on behalf of the organization. He's speaking on behalf of himself. And secondly, if you're looking kind of just to start with the broadest base possible, I would suggest you go to our buyer's guide on our website at www.txssa.org. And those are the members who do website design. So that's a good place to start. And then I would ask other members, ask them for a list of members that they've done business with, and call them up and ask them directly, ask them for their personal experience. So that's,
one other
those are my
suggestion on
suggestions.
that would be go to, just troll websites for whatever product, like if it's RV type of properties or just regular storage properties, start trolling websites in your area of the state and see what's up there, or even other parts of the state. And then you can find out, if you like the web design, and find out more about that company from the contact information on the website.
Great point. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, as they say. So, you know, see what you find something you like and find out who designed their site. Wonderful suggestion, Mike. Okay, couple of questions. We've got Jennifer is asking, is it more important to build our occupancy first and then raise rates, or should we not worry about occupancy and just continue with raising rates? Now, I don't know if Jennifer's situation, she can send a follow-up message. I don't know if she's in lease-up still, or if she's an established property. You know, maybe her occupancy is down. I don't know if you can answer that question based on, you know, what we're reading here, but you want to give that one a stab?
Yeah, that's a great question. It sounds like a very elementary question, but it's a great question because you're always balancing what I call greed against fear.
And she
Greed,
says she's at
more
85%, Mike, 85%
okay,
occupancy.
85% is considered in the business a stabilized occupancy. For example, if you were going to the bank to refinance, they're not going to give you credit for higher than 85%. They assume that your property is going to run about that. So, and if you were selling a property, most buyers are not going to assume that you're going to be able to run consistently better than 85. So, and from a cash flow point of view, if you're already 85%, I'd be focusing on rate by size and pushing the rate and see how it goes. Now, while I'm doing that, I would also be, we didn't get into this, but this is really the guts of understanding how it's going week by week. You're looking at your calls, visits, and leases. If you know your normal closing ratio is 2 out of 3 people, you close 65% of the deals. Like out of 10 prospects, you'd close 6 or 7 leases. Whatever your normal ratio is, and if you see that thing dropping off dramatically and you're losing, then that's telling you, okay, I've got some resistance here. It could be to price. So my point is that if you're watching carefully how the traffic is reacting, the prospects, the calls, the visits, you can tell quickly enough. And a lot of times the numbers will, the whole point is to have a manager that's disciplined enough and understands the importance of recording the traffic. If you're recording the traffic accurately, you can tell if your rents are being accepted by the market, provided that you are already comfortable that you're showing ready units, and that you've got a good salesperson on site that's representing your product well. And most of our managers do a great job with that. So a lot of times it's back to that closing ratio. And I would say when I've tracked that, standard closing rate, or standard is probably not the right word, kind of a rule of thumb is that we should be closing 75 to 80% just generally across all of our properties as an average. With you looking at the history of your property, you might know it's 90% because of the market dynamics in your site. But you look at that closing ratio, and that'll help you decide if you're pushing the rates too much, and your occupancy by size.
Mike, our next question, and it may be one of our last, if people want to send through questions, now is the time. What are your thoughts on rent increases to current tenants during the holidays? In other words, customers who are too busy with the holidays to move out. Ho, ho, ho.
Yeah, I think the questioner answered their own question with that last little paraphrase. You know what? I have seen owners that will plan it that way, and they'll put the increase in for January 1st or February 1st, either because they think that it will get lost in the holiday shuffle, or because, you know, it's especially in northern Texas and other states north of us, who wants to move when it's icy and snowy. So, yeah, it's all fair as in love and war. You've got a month-to-month lease. The tenant has the flexibility. We give them the flexibility of no other industry. They can move out every month, and they can move back in every month. It's just you don't see that in apartments. You don't see that in any other type of real estate. So in return, we have the flexibility to bump that rate when we think it makes sense for us. But I would say that if I was starting from scratch with a property with a manager, I would just do rent increases every month as I met my parameters. If they'd been there a certain amount of time, if they hadn't had an increase in a certain amount of time, and if the rate that they're paying is less than the rate that I expect to get, all of those things, every month you would be like on a 300-unit property, you might be bumping 20 to 30 people every month. It just becomes part of the process, and you never have a lot of risk that way.
Thank you. Carmen asks, do you think becoming leasing agents for Penske or Hertz will help increase our occupancy?
It can. If you can handle the administrative side of those trucks without it sacrificing your storage business. And by that I mean that if you're very lightly staffed and you're somewhat spread thin, then having that truck to deal with is going to create times when you're wearing your truck rental hat when you have storage prospects in it, and you're getting that truck rental person out the door, and you've got to do certain things to get, you know, the lease done for that. And meantime, your primary business is suffering because you're busy with the other. But if you've got the staffing to cover both, then yes, it can help. You can have crossover business. And in fact, you can work those leads. When somebody says they're going to be returning a truck, you make sure they know you've got storage so that they know when they get there it's not just a truck drop-off point, it's a storage property. And there's ways you can work those leads so you can get business. But the whole premise is that you have the staff to handle it. If you don't have the staff to handle it, you're going to create tension for the manager and end up possibly hurting your business.
All right, so I'm not sure who has control of the slides, but if you'll advance to the next slide, that was our last question that we've received. And I do want to remind you, if you didn't ask a question, either because you were too shy or Mike was so thorough that you didn't feel like you needed to ask anything, but you have a question later, feel free to send your question. Holly, do you have control? If you do, if you'll advance to that last slide, and Mike, if you'll click. We've got one more
last slide. Can you not see it?
No, ma'am. We're seeing the question slide.
Okay.
So our contact information should be coming up here momentarily. In the meantime, I will tell you that our sponsor again today was SiteLink Software, or S&D software maker of SiteLink. Mike talked extensively about using his experience with using their revenue management module. And our speaker again was Mike Gately. And Mike, would you remind us of your email address? That slide doesn't appear to be coming up.
Sure, it's
there
Mike.
We go.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Mike Gately at sbcglobal.net. So if you have questions, you can send Mike an email directly. You can also contact. Thank you, Mike. And I know you're going to be traveling, visiting properties today, and then at the board meeting tomorrow. So don't be surprised if it doesn't take him a few days to respond to you. There is our toll-free number in the center. We hope that you also find us on Facebook. Our fan base is growing every day, and we post many great things for our members. And I did have one more question come through. If Mike, if you want to take that, and
Sure.
Those of you who don't want to hang around for that last question, feel free to disconnect, and we will again be sending you the archive as well as a link to an evaluation. We would greatly appreciate it. I know it's hard to remember to do that when you get prompted. So if you have a comment right now that you'd like to share with us, you can send it to info@txssa.org. Just shoot Holly an email and give us your feedback. And especially if you have a suggestion for future webinars, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. I think this particular topic is so important and always timely. But we would love to offer sessions that are meaningful to you. Again, our site link contact information is on the left side of your screen. Mark us at smdsoftware.com. smdsoftware.com is the website. And our question is, I'm sorry, I cannot see the whole thing. Let me see. The facility that I manage is in an area where there is currently more supply than demand. Most of the properties are at 60% or lower. He has the flip side situation, or he or she has the flip side situation from our previous question. Because of this, our competitors are offering very large discounts. What would you recommend to be more competitive and to help generate more traffic? That may be such a long answer, Mike, that you may have to talk offline to this person. But do you want to give just your last parting hint?
A couple of things. One, if it's really a gut-wrenching market where you're just having to slug it out because there's too much supply, you're probably going to have to get in there with them and offer specials. But the other thing I would say is that make sure you've got a really good sales manager on site willing to pay for the best you can hire, because the manager always makes a difference, but in an especially competitive market, every lease counts. And the other thing I would say is try different like if you can put a reader sign out front, I would have a reader sign like an LED reader sign. If you can't do that, then do bootleg signs and manual reader signs. Just work that curb appeal as hard as you can. Have flowers out there, and just continually make sure the front of your property is going to get exposure to the drive-by traffic. And the web, like we were saying, I would use people. There's a lot of folks now that are using the internet to the exclusion of anything else to find storage. So make sure you've got a strong presence on the web, search engine optimization, pay-per-click, whatever. I would do a lot of that to drive traffic to your property. And then on the phone, I would shop your property and make sure that the phone calls are being handled like you want, and I might even offer an incentive for a tour, whether they leased or not. You might give them like a $10 gift certificate to a nearby restaurant or something, where you work out a deal with that restaurant where it doesn't cost you $10, maybe it costs you $5, but they're kicking the other $5 just to get the foot traffic. And I would like to add my thanks for this whole webinar to the support I got in the preparation for it and for the slides, PowerPoint from both Holly and Brom and Jenny. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here with us today, everyone. And, of course, thank you to our wonderful speaker, Mike Gately. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. And have a wonderful day. We're going to disconnect.